I am a history enjoyer, but given that Paradox Interactive contributes a frankly excessively sized foundation, well, I tend to end up with specific questions and observations that could be solved through extensive research, or maybe in some cases a couple Wikipedia rabbit holes, but I've also realized that it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. No wait, that's Pride and Prejudice. I meant to say it is a truth universally acknowledged that the moment you upload a video about a topic, then those experts would unironically show up in your comment section. This happens to CGP Grey like all the time, and even I would observe this where I would post some obscure trivia on some random EU4 game mechanic, and someone in my comment section would link to a forum post about how they specifically have actually spent the last 15 years of their life optimizing female advisor chance modifier stacking runs, while also on the side mathematically proving that Memel has always been a square, actually. So today I'm going to just cut out the middleman, ask my top 5 questions into the YouTube void, and hope you enjoyed me asking them. As for the actual answers, well, at the end of the day, it's a YouTube comment section, so be aware there's like the ability to lie inside of it. There's no peer review for posting, actually, Italy isn't real, in the comment section, so make of that what you will. Anyway, before we begin, just a quick intermission to say that a like would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. We're just short of 52,000 subs, which if achieved, I'll be able to claim that I have 1,000 subscribers for every card in a set of playing cards, so that'll be neat. Anyway, enough self-shilling, let's get to question 1. And for that, I've quickly loaded into Crusader Kings 2, as you should be able to see here. So if we go to the 769 start date and take a look at Tibet, Tibet is doing, like, really well. They own a lot of land, and the land they own is pretty good, especially once we start comparing it in terms of its development and holdings to other land that the Europeans have at this point, or even the lands in Arabia. Like, again, let's take a look at Tibet proper. You start in Tibet making a pretty penny, and that's with you being over Desmonene cap. Now, not only do you have a unique monastic feudal government type, which lets you hold castle as well as temple holdings without penalty, you just have a lot of good land. Like, your capital of Lhasa itself is pretty developed with 4 sub-holdings and a main castle, with extra holding slots, and the land around you is just good land, right? You have 3 to 4 holding slots, castles around you, your vassals are owning pretty decent land in the Nepal areas, you're all very nice and unified, you've got good land around you, again as mentioned, you are making pretty decent bank out of the trade, because a decent chunk of the Silk Road actually goes through you, and you have trade post opportunities in Lhasa, and some trade post opportunities within your land as well, certainly, so you can make a lot of money from trade, because trade post exists. And while the government tab here may indicate that, oh, you have some tribal vassals, which is true, you have some land here that is certainly in need of development, like these tribes over here that are underneath your domain, you also just have a lot of your land that's not actually tribal. Like, if you take a look at this land here, under this subject, he's feudal, so he shows up on this map as dotted out for wrong government type, or even these vassals up here, again, show up as the wrong government type. That's because they're feudal governments, so they are still very developed and very rich land, right? So, like, there's a lot of potential here to do really well. And they do end up doing really well. Tibet tends to do quite well within CK2 campaigns. They use this wealth to scale and keep building up their country. They tend to be quite rich and well developed. And Tibet poses a serious threat. It certainly doesn't exactly fall off compared to the Indian kingdoms, usually invading into India and even more fortifying their positions. Tibet tends to do quite well, I find. The land is good. The development is good. Good prospects for Tibet. And then let's take a look at not 769 Tibet, let's take a look at EU4 Tibet. So here we are in EU4, and let's take a look at Tibet in the EU4 state. Yeah, it's collapsed, it's gone, it's a mess of a bunch of different kingdoms like Lad, Guje, a couple hordes like Sara Yogurt, or Sagi Yogurt as I like to call them, Cam, popping out, which gives you a bit of a hint, like, oh, they got hoarded and Mongoled, which makes sense, a lot of nations got Mongoled, but a lot of nations got Mongoled and recovered, so what really happened with Tibet? And if you take a look at Sang here, which is, I don't want to say the successor state, but hey, has at least got Tibetan ideas preemptively, so maybe it's Tibetan, owns Lhasa. Lhasa's nowhere near as developed as it is in the CK2 time point. I mean, it's 7 development, or 1 development for every holding slot it had in CK2, which is not a good scaling conversion. And yeah, this land is just terrible. Because let's pop into the game and see what I mean. The land you're working here is mountains, which it was previously, but now mountains come with plus 35% dev cost, as well as being Arctic for another plus 50% dev cost, as well as reducing the number of buildings possible. So developing this land is absolutely miserable, and the economic highlight of this area is a glacial, plus 50% dev cost, plus 50% dev cost Arctic gold mine. This is miserable. And this is the economic highlight of Tibet, because everything else here is awful. Remember, this used to be on the Silk Road. You could make money from trade. What about money from trade from Tibet here? No. This is arguably joint with one of the worst trade nodes in the entire game that you could ever own, because it is a starting node, so you have no new money coming in, the actual land you have here is awful. It's 3 dead mountains making cows, or wool, great. Again, your economic highlight is a gold mine, so it doesn't even contribute trade value. And to add insult to injury, you're surrounded by really rich trade nodes. You have India and China just outside of you. Look at this. Look at all this wealth from India and China going around, right? Some of the best trade nodes in the game. And none of it goes into you or flows through you, so you can't make any money from it. And what's worse is that empires like China or India that set up shop tend to have a lot of trade power because they tend to unify the area, so they end up sucking money out of you as well. You're an inland node, so it's really easy to, again, steal money from you. So even if you do some kind of build up a trade economy in this game with Lhasa, you just get screwed again because you can't. Maybe this is the case of EU4 coding, where they specifically accidentally made Lhasa awful, but this sucks. This is awful. You don't want this. This is bad. This is bad for trade. You have no development, you have a terrible time, you don't even start unified, so you have to go on a unification campaign as compared to Crusader Kings, and your land is awful and ruined. And I guess you can again say they got Mongol, because there's a couple hordes over here that aren't looking to, you know, too good for your existence. But my point is, you're a mountainous kingdom. How on God's green earth do you get Mongoled? You just go into the mountains. Maybe it's a bit of a reductive analysis, but like, horse archers and horses famously do well on, like, plains. If you can just go hide in the mountain forts, how are you struggling, right? I think I'm missing really something out of the loop here on Tibetan history, but just what happened to you? How do you fall off so hard? You seem to have so many conditions set up for you to be an Asian Switzerland making bank from all the rich people around you, while also being quite rich yourself, and then you just kind of fall into the wayside. And it's not like you recover. Victoria 3 Tibet isn't exactly known as an economic anything, and by Hearts of Iron 4 the Tibetan economy is about equal to that of Bhutan, so to say, not an economy at all. You have like one civilian factory after finishing 3 focuses. So yeah, what happened here? What's the deal with Tibet and this legendary fall-off? That's my question 1. And as you may have guessed, it's very inspired by Crusader Kings 2. And this is going to be the order of the questions we have today. They're kind of working through each Paradox title in somewhat chronological order. But we'll leave Crusader Kings 2 and question 1 behind to move on to EU4 and a couple more general questions. See, European Universalis 4 has a couple themes explored within it. You know, the rise of the Enlightenment within the later periods, the Protestant Reformation, how Europe really took off and started this whole colonizing thing, and indeed the process of colonization, when nations within Europe, like England, France, Castile, or later Spain and Portugal, would go and set up massive colonial empires within the New World, would set up trade posts and start colonizing within Africa, so the Netherlands within South Africa, for example, and then obviously get into Asia and start colonizing that, with the British colonizing into Australia, the Dutch colonizing into the Dutch East Indies. I mean, they put their name on it, so you know that's what they colonized, and of course the Spanish taking over things like the Philippines, which are called the Philippines because they named it after, well, King Philip. So there's a lot of colonization taking place in this period, and I mean, even the more developed and larger nations didn't escape. The British East India Company wasn't exactly worried about the Indians being there when they set up the British East India Company in India, right? However, a nation that seems to have just never gotten colonized, and this is one of my main questions, is Japan, because people colonized a bunch of islands. The Dutch East Indies grabbed the Dutch East Indies, right? The Spanish grabbed the Philippines. But when the Portuguese got to Japan, they were like, I guess we'll set up a trading post and also give them guns as part of trading and call it a day? Just, there seems to have been no real concentrated efforts, unless I missed it, to invade or set up a colony in Japan. And this is one of the things that I just don't understand. I get it's further away than some of the other colonies, I guess further away than the Dutch East Indies, but if you're from the Netherlands, and you've sailed all the way over, to the Dutch East Indies to set up colonies here, I mean, Japan isn't that much further away, and don't tell me that there's some kind of unique Japanese warrior culture that's in the way. The Philippines and the Dutch East Indies were full of nations that had plenty of warrior cultures that did not stop them being colonized. Don't tell me that Ayutthaya and the Southeast Asian kingdoms there did not have a warrior culture. It's just kind of decided, I guess, that Japan would not be colonized. And there are other nations that avoided colonization, but many of them that did were basically either China, that got opened later, or nations under the protection of China. So, for example, Korea, that when Japan tried to invade them, they did manage to hold off the Japanese earlier invasions through the use of their fleets and the whole exploits of a certain admiral that you're more than welcome, and I would encourage you to read into, and the deployment of the turtle ships, so, you know, good stuff there. But on land, their whole military strategy was wait for the Chinese troops to arrive to help support us, right? They didn't really, like, survive Western imperialism because of their own commitments to the Hermit Kingdom. They survived it because they're part of the Chinese sphere of influence and hence under Chinese protection. And when that Chinese protection started to wane, Well, so did Korean independence. At least within my understanding. I'm probably pissed off some Korean nationalists at this point, but then, hey, me pissing off random people of the internet, that's kind of what I do on this channel. Regardless, Japan enjoyed no such Chinese protection, right? That there wasn't any kind of obligation from Beijing to protect Japan if the Europeans started showing up, and yet it just kind of avoided colonization. The Spanish would show up to the Philippines, they would conquer the local tribes and put them under, put them under their guns to work for them. They'd then arrive in Japan and sell them their guns? Like, what's going on here? Why is Japan getting away with it? Is it just the fact that it's a mountainous land that's off the coast of a much richer area? Well, that's also a thing that applies to the UK. Of course, the mountains are more in Scotland and Wales, but they never stopped the English being invaded by everyone, like the Vikings and the Normans, right? Did we just never bother to colonize Japan? That's really the TLDR of the question, though. Why is there no French Japan, or English Japan, or Spanish Japan? Why didn't we try? But that's it for question 2. We're still going to remain within the domain of EU4 for question 3, but we're now moving on to a bit more of a meta question. Namely, EU4, or Europa Universalis 4, is named after this continent here, Europe. Europe is the main character in this period, and that's because Europe did all the colonization and expanding and bringing European ideas to the rest of the world. But why Europe? Because if you were going to not give me a history textbook and just give me knowledge about the state of the world in, say, 1444, and ask which one of these continents is about to go and take off and conquer half the planet in a colonial empire, I would guess India. Because, and here's my pitch, most things that people give as a reason to why European colonization succeeded, or why the Europeans went around conquering all of Europe, kind of still applies to India. Let's start with the big one, that the European Western military technology was born in a crucible of constant warfare, where there were loads of smaller kingdoms constantly fighting each other and refining their military tactics. That's just India, right? Like, these guys are no strangers to warfare, they are fighting each other pretty chronically and all the goddamn time. Is it sparked by the Muslim invasions into Europe that, created greater responses and forced people to innovate, like the invasions of Iberia that were forced out, or the Ottoman and earlier incursions to the Byzantine Empire and into the Balkans? Yeah, I mean, again, that also happened to India. In fact, by the exact same religion, the Muslims also really went ham into India multiple times, including by the Mughals that are about to go do it. And one of the other reasons I've of course seen for why India didn't do that well is because they've been invaded all the time, and that really hampered their development into being a global superpower. But with all due respect, Europe got invaded all the time, like, all of the goddamn time. The Huns and the Mongols didn't exactly ignore the European theatre. The Ottomans are about to invade the Balkans and get as far as Vienna. Are we forgetting all the Crusades to drive the Muslims out of Naples and out of Sicily? Iberia, again, was an entire Reconquista process. And, like, again, Europe is no stranger to unifying forces within and without. India had a couple internal unifiers, for example, but so did, well, Europe. And we don't really tend to think about Europe attempts at internal unification, but with all due respect, what was Rome, if not an attempt at European unity? And it wasn't exactly stopping by the 1400s. Napoleon went for a united Europe in, like, 1820, basically. So this claim that Europe was having less war or more correct war than India just doesn't really hold up after more than 3 seconds of inspection. And next we have to look at the population factors. One of the arguments was that, Europe was really overpopulated, so they went to colonize because there's so many people living there. I'm sorry, have you seen India? It's like, if there's an overpopulation competition, Europe is getting blown out of the water by India, just winning that competition yet again. And is it maybe a maritime tradition that Castile Portugal had? Well, there was a kingdom around the Vijayanagar area, I believe it's the Choi or something, that set up a naval empire within the Dutch East Indies. Or what would become the Dutch East Indies, or Southeast Asia, right? They had plenty of their own naval maritime strength. And if the argument is that the Europeans wanted spices, so they went to colonize, I am sorry, India is just closer to the Spice Islands, right? Like, if you're going to be making a colonial empire, having your colonial home ports in Bengal and going over to the Spice Islands, right? That's just closer. Colonization is easier when it's closer. And if the only target of your colonization is Africa, you're equidistant at worst, right? Like, if you're going to colonize South Africa, having your home base in the Netherlands or having your home base in, I don't know, Sindh, pretty equidistant at this point, so don't tell me they were further away. Yes, they're further away from the Americas, but Europeans didn't decide to colonize the world because they saw the Americas. Well, I guess they did. But European initial exploration efforts were to get to the Spice Islands, to get to East India, to trade with them. They were not there trying to sail to a brand new domain to discover colonially, right? I guess that is the one thing I can think of. But again, it's not like India was out of places to colonize, right? Plenty of targets for them to expand their colonial empires too. So yeah, that's my question 3. Why is it Europa Universalis, and why did India again throw so hard? But that's enough talking about India. Let's move on to our next question, which is starting to really enter the Victoria 3 Victoria period, but one I'm still going to be demonstrating within EU4 because I think it makes it a bit of a clearer case. Namely, the question of industrialization, because industrialization is kind of already kicked off by the Victoria 3 period, and of course the heartland of this industrialization, the birthplace of industrialization itself, is England, right? We have the steam engine and all of that really taking place in England. And there's a couple reasons that people give as to why England was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. They had a large colonial empire providing them with raw resources. They had coal and steel within their local areas, and one of the earliest things that was industrialized was the British wool industry to make cloth and fabrics, because those machines really benefited from industrial applications to make them much more efficient and drive down the costs of production. And all the things I've just described here apply perfectly to Spain, right? Like, let's take a look at the trade good map mode here. Yes, England has coal, and that's reflected within the EU4 time period, right? But so does Spain. Spain isn't exactly short of coal or iron or other industrial machinery and other tools of industry. And the aforementioned British cloth industry that we talk about here within the cloth and wool provinces that you see within England, that was part of their driving forces behind industrialization, that's just still present within Spain as well. But bear in mind, of course, that they do own Aragon too at this point, right? So you still have all of these cloths, you have all this iron, and you have all of the, well, already clicked on the cloths, you see what I mean, the wool provinces for the birthplace of your industry. You have coal within the Asturias area, you have steel. Everything seems to be set up for you to become an industrial power before England does. And the other factor of colonial empires being necessary to provide raw resources, I'm sorry, we're talking about Spain here, right? We're talking about one of the biggest colonial empires, if not straight up the biggest out there. And the colonies they have are great for raw materials within the domain of, like, the Philippines and, you know, South America. It is ripe raw material land, because I'm sorry, what exactly is Britain getting out of Canada? Fish and fur. Ah yes, the fur factories, my favourite. Spain just seems much better suited to get the Industrial Revolution, for lack of a better word. And I do say this in the sense of, like, again, if I was placed inside the 1800s and had to predict which country between England or Spain or anywhere in the world is going to spawn the Industrial Revolution, my guess would have been Spain. So why not Spain? And naturally, of course, Spain does industrialize, but it's quite behind at this point compared to the likes of England and France and even Northern Italy or the Germans, right? When it comes to the industrialization process. So how does Spain throw so hard? They've been dealt this almost perfect hand, and yet where is the Spanish industrial might? What happened here? That is my question 4. Where is Spanish industrialization? But despite making a much more interesting alternative scenario mod for Victoria 3, where Spain is the one that's industrializing, well, we have to move on to our final question of the day, and for that, we have to get into everyone's favourite game, Hearts of Iron 4. So, taking a look at the world situation, one of the things that is rather famously remembered is how Germany, Italy, and Japan worked together during this time period to be the 3 big evil nations that the rest of the world was fighting. I do quite like how other nations that were aligned with the Germans, Italians, and the Japanese kind of got away scot-free, looking at you, Romania, or Croatia, or Bulgaria, right? Although I guess getting off scot-free is an understatement. Point being is, they had other allies, but they were seen as the big 3. My main question, though, is Germany kind of got screwed over by allying with Japan, because basically, in my understanding of the situations, by allying with Japan, they got absolutely nothing out of it, but had to contribute a lot back to said alliance. So let's begin with the obvious statement that Japan and China were not best buds at this point, but Germany actually spent a lot of time cooperating with China, getting a bunch of raw materials, for example, getting the tungsten they needed out of China, I believe, and some other things, and in return training the Chinese army, so there was kind of a raw materials exchange with the Chinese government for the Germans, which they ended in 1941 because obviously Germany was a bit more aligned with Japan at that point, and Japan was invading China, so they're going to be working with both. So that's a rip, they give up that whole agreement. And with Japan, they sign a bunch of anti-Soviet agreements over, like, anti-Comintern pacts. That's great. However, when Germany does Operation Barbarossa into the Soviet Union, the Japanese don't help. Like, you've got this one, like, ally that you've thrown away your cooperation with China for, your previous goodwill and relationships with, that you throw away under the bus just to get Japan on your side, and then Japan isn't on your side. And when Japan does the Pearl Harbor and gets involved against America, right before they Pearl Harbor, there's actually a kind of like, I believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, set of exchanges where Japan just basically asks Germany and Italy, like, we're not going to attack America unless you guys are going to be on our side. And Germany and Italy go, yes, we are going to be on your side, go ahead and attack America. And then they do go through with it. So they drag America into this war against the Germans. So the Germans probably are not, too happy about an extra enemy getting involved. And a pretty big one at that. I mean, it's America, right? So Japan drags enemies against the Germans, but doesn't help fight the enemies that Germany already has, right? Like, the Soviets had to be persuaded to attack Japan by 1945 when Germany is defeated, for crying out loud. Like, they're still not inherently at war, which is incredible. So what does Germany get out of this Japan alliance? They've been screwed out of their involvement within China. Japan doesn't really help the Germans materially as much as China did, because again, Japan is also lacking raw resources. They don't help them invade the Soviet Union. Out of every single ally Germany is getting, I mean, yeah, sure, Italy, you can laugh about them being useless and failing to invade Greece, but at least they were on their side. At least they were fighting the same enemies that the Germans were fighting. They were both at war with the British, for example, right? Those allies make sense. This is an ally on the other side of the map that you're giving up relations for, that with other countries to appease them. And they don't help you when you need them. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like Germany just got the short end of the stick with their Japan alliance. Completely screwed over here. So that's my real question. Why on God's green earth did Germany ally the Japanese? What was the masterful thinking there? Well, I hope you enjoyed my questions I've asked here. If you have any answers, you're welcome to elaborate them in however much you want in the comment section. Or go join my Discord and say hi and elaborate it to me in a massive block of text in general. I like reading blocks of text, I know. But with that all said, that is going to be all the time I have for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Solemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Row Gaming, Grabmill Flavia, Conno, Andrea Zalberg, Deki, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, and Mr. Kumshok.